Over the years, I've come into possession of some Rutherford family correspondence, and it's very interesting, some of the things that were going on in the family, and I'm sure you're going to find it very interesting, especially the death threat. Say what? These were found in a used bookstore. Some of the correspondence, until recently, I didn't know who it was addressed to. So I started a research. Who is this person? Her name was Ella Newkirk. I have a postcard that was addressed to Mrs. F.M. Newkirk. She lived in Tipton, Missouri, and the postcard is dated 1914. She was baptized to the Heavenly Hope in 1914. That's Rutherford's sister in 1914.
Awesome. How did you get them again?
Oh, out of this correspondence
Don't
to
hold
her?
out your sources from me. You know where you got
This one came with a death threat. It sounds strange. This came with a death threat. So there's a friend. He went to a used bookstore in Missouri, and he found studies in the scriptures. I had these inserted in the middle of the pages.
You're kidding.
No.
Jeff, God is with you. For this to end up in your hands,
Well,
I'm not joking here.
Who knew I was going to use it either?
Wow.
Of course, I didn't find these. These are passed to me. But not all of this correspondence came from the same source. Some of the correspondence were found in other books that were passed down through other various collectors. I just happened to be looking at all the correspondence this year and realized, hey, this is all addressed to the same person. Even though they came from different sources, most of this was addressed to the same person.
Well, they were given to somebody as a gift, correct? And then somehow through time, he never did anything with them, just kept them in his personal library, and Jeff ended up with them. And I don't think he realized what he had until not too long ago either. And then he started looking at this stuff. That's how Jeff came across having actual letters from the authors themselves. That's an interesting story, actually.
Next letter, there's a 3-page letter, is addressed in January 1922. Now, this was found in another book from another source, but I notice it's the same person. It's discussing some of the trouble and dissension that was going on in the Watchtower Society at the time. And it's interesting what the letter says. It says, I don't know who writes these articles, nor who's responsible, but I know I'm trying to run the faith I once had and to keep my heart with all diligence. And what is in question is, in the letter, it says that in 1921, they were questioning if the Apostle Paul was actually an apostle.
I don't remember. They actually said Paul wasn't an apostle?
Yeah. But yeah, that was something brand new.
What happened to the scripture, Paul, an apostle of Christ, blah, 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 blah?
Well, to be fair, what he really said is that Paul was not one of the 12.
This seemed like, in the 20s, seemed like the beginning of a lot of odd ideas that were put forth as the splinter groups kept getting further apart. And what was the scripture that you said earlier about Peter?
Well, if you look at the first chapter, then the third chapter, the Apostle Peter's talking about the inspiration of Scripture. And in the context of the first chapter, he's talking about that of the Old Testament. When you get to the third chapter, he's talking about Paul's writings and Paul's letters in the New Testament. And he's also counting them as inspired by the Holy Spirit. But this correspondence, this Ella Newkirk, I have her photo here I found on Ancestry.com of her and her husband. And it's about 1900 or so she'd be about 40 years old. Her husband's name was Francis Marion. There's a photo of her tombstone. She was born March 8th, 1858, and died August 28th, 1952.
She lived quite a while for that time.
Really, there's very little information about her. I don't know if she stayed with the society. I don't know if she went to one of the splinter groups or just, left entirely, faded away. I have no idea. The interesting letter that was written to her we're coming up to. But before we get there, we need to look at Rutherford's history himself. Where was Rutherford in 1916 when the letter we're going to look at is in question?
So this is pretty interesting. I think you'll like it.
In 1916, he was traveling from convention to convention. He made a little side stop in California. with the documentation we have now, with all the newspapers, there's a Bible student newspaper that we've mentioned in previous discussions, the Watchtowers themselves, the convention reports, you can actually track Rutherford's whereabouts as he moves from place to place to place. There's a photo of him with Russell in July 1913 at a Springfield, Massachusetts convention. In July 1916, Rutherford's in Oakland, California. He's traveling from California to conventions out east and then back to California. I think his home at the time was there. I found in the newspapers some of the topics that he was talking about, and these would have been little paid advertisements that he was putting in.
No, I find it very funny that the title, Prominent Gotham Attorney.
Yeah, I was thinking, I am Batman.
So I'm hoping others those watching this get a kick out of that too.
So July 22nd, 23rd, Oakland Tribune has him talking on why are the nations at war? Of course, this is during the First World War. The Oakland Tribune of July 29 and 30 talks about his lecture being about the coming kingdom. Now, it's interesting, from 1912 to August 1916, there's studies and lectures, lists of those who were asked by the society to lecture or do various things for them. Rutherford is absent from 1912 until August 1916. Remember, Russell's away at this time, and he leaves Macmillan in charge. I don't know, did Macmillan add him on there? Did Russell do it? I don't know.
And where this takes an interesting twist for it all is that was during the time when the will was being questioned. And those who have said and stated Rutherford was not part of the organization at the time, he was in California, and then this came out, you never heard of him. Well, it is true. He disappeared from Watchtower publication, as you can see in the slide here, but yet in the other newspapers and Bible student publications, he was traveling around giving talks. Now, that could have been a private, as we've discussed in the past, that could have been a private invitations and all that. But now, right here, like you said, until August 16th, when Macmillan's in charge, poof, he's back into the Watchtower again. So he's not in the will, but right up in August, prior to the October transition of everything, he's back in. So there's a lot of question. We could save that for another discussion.
And I'll insert. I'll discuss a little bit of that now, because there's an accusation that William A. Baker made that Rutherford was sent away in the 1915 or 1916 period of time. But no evidence is given for that. It's just, and it's also hearsay.
There's a lot of odd coincidences about that, both in favor and in disfavor of that. One, like you said, after the filming of the photodrama of creation, they were short of money and they removed or let go 70 members of Bethel. So he might have left voluntarily, whatever, we don't know. But he was in California at the time, San Diego, right? That's where he was at the time. And then all of a sudden, after the death, there was a telegram that has been documented, and he's back. Well, that doesn't coincide with the will. I mean, there's a lot, like we said, we should save that for another discussion. There's a lot in there. But this kind of shows he was out of it.
Well, I also have a recording of Cora Sunbaum, or Cora Keene, who was living at Bethel at the time in 1916 and 1917.
See, Brother Russell died at the end of October 1916. The next Sunday, the first Sunday in November, was his funeral. Rutherford had been away, sent away, I understand. He sent a telegram, don't do anything till I come. And when he came, he walked right into Brother Russell's study and took care of things.
All she says is, evidently Rutherford had been sent away. Again, doesn't say anything, and it only says evidently. She doesn't really know. So what I did is I went through all the documented evidence to figure out, well, where was Rutherford? What was he doing during the 1915 and 1916 period? And he's with Russell most of the time. They're at the same conventions. He's introducing Russell, or Russell's introducing him.
And why? What is your thoughts on why he wasn't included from 1912 to August 1916 in the Bible student classes lectures? What do you think was the reason for that?
He was independent. You can actually see him giving talks and being the chairman of the Watchtower conventions. And Russell, of course, would have been in charge of that. So he put Rutherford in charge of being chairman at many of those conventions during those years.
Yes, he was giving talks, but was he sanctioned by the Watchtower Society, the Bible Student Association?
He is, if he's published in that lecture list. That's Watchtower all the way.
Okay, and that's what I'm saying. He's not in there.
Except for this one here, from August on, he's there.
Okay, so he was there for two months?
Yeah, August, September. Yeah.
Okay, you're actually proving my theory right by what you're saying. Okay? Stop and think about this. Russell did not put him for years, except for the last 2 months before his death, into the Watchtower. Prior to that, he's only in the St. Paul's. The St. Paul's was a private newspaper, which could have been any Bible, like you and I, what we're doing. You and I could have had Rutherford sitting here with us. That doesn't mean Russell agreed with it in the Watchtower. Do you see what I'm saying?
I see that, but I do know he was doing official business for the Watchtower. And you'll see letters from him for the things that he's doing earlier. He's just not on the speaker list. I think part of it was that after the photo drama, they let go, I think, 70 or so from Bethel, just because they were in financial straits. He's still traveling around and lecturing, and I think he's trying to find work in the different places that he's going. So it's rumored that while he was in California, and he wasn't there long, he was working in a department store. We don't have any verification of that, but we do have hearsay. But also in the 1915-16 period, he was in California at the World's Fair. Just a side note of history, for you Little House on the Prairie fans, Laura Ingalls Wilder was also at the same fair. There's actually a book, West from Home or something like that. Laura Ingalls writes letters back home about her trip to the World's Fair with her daughter Rose at the time. Laura Ingalls Wilder and Rutherford at the same place.
They might have crossed paths.
He went to Europe for the society in 1915. So, of course, he's going to be absent for a lot of these things because of that. And he automatically shows up in August. Why does he show up? My speculation is when Russell left to go to these conventions as he's traveling around the country, and these couple months before he dies, he puts Macmillan in charge. Macmillan puts him back on the list. But that's just speculation.
Actually, you're more right than my thoughts, probably.
Then is
very good. Very good.
And when you get here, he's back on the list, but then he vanishes again. And the question is, where did he go? They're at the Niagara Falls Convention together, Russell and Rutherford. The Watchtower, September 2nd, 1916. Rutherford went to the Los Angeles Convention. And then the Seattle Convention report says that Rutherford was supposed to be there to give a lecture, and he wasn't there. Where did he go? What happened? He disappeared. He didn't make it. Until now, we didn't know why. Why did he not go to the convention? It seems like a very innocent question, very silly question, but the evidence that we found is the whole point for this video. It is very, very interesting. That convention was September 14th to the 17th. I think there would have been enough time for Rutherford to leave that convention, maybe a little earlier or something, and get all the way down to Santa Ana, California, where he was scheduled to give a lecture on the Universal Kingdom of Peace. And we have, and notice it's billed as sequel to Pastor Russell's lecture. You'll see that in some of the other advertisements that I found in the paper. So he was in Santa Ana, California on the 17th, and on the 21st is another one of those letters that was addressed to his sister, Ella Newkirk. Now, the timing of this, again, is interesting. This is September, end of September, 1916, just about a month before the death of Charles Russell. He's staying in the Hotel Sacramento, according to the envelope that it was in and the postmark. And remember, it's sent to his sister, Mrs. Ellen Newkirk in Tipton. Some of the points in this letter are interesting. The reason he didn't get to Seattle was because of a little dispute he was having with his brother, Will. William was an officer and a fireman for a short time, and we'll get a little bit into that. The letter talks about a family matter that caused him a little bit of dispute with his brother. Rutherford says he's running out of money. Why should I come? I have very little money. Why should I come look after the farm? We're not going to get any money anyway. He gives a little detail about this family dispute or the family problems they were having. I may stop off at Tipton between trains and see you for a few hours. So he was going to be able to see his sister. He also was scheduled to go to Joplin, Missouri on the 8th of October. There's a secondary source here, the St. Paul Enterprise, that mentions the same thing, that Rutherford was going to be there to give a lecture. Now, the next section of the letter gives a little background into Rutherford's family history that up until now has been previously unknown. So it says, I note what you say about Will and Bert being there. And that's two of his brothers. If I could bring myself to believe that Will really cares to see me, I would stop there on my way east. But I can't feel that he does care to see me for any good. I'm very sorry that such is the case. While I know that I am in the Lord's hand, and fear not what any man might do unto me, yet for his sake, and that of the other members of the family, I believe it best for me to keep out of his way. He's said so many harsh things about me that my presence might provoke him to do things he would afterwards much regret. I wished it were not so. But we have another letter.
And that's where it gets even more interesting.
It says, furthermore, I see no reason why I should spend what little money I have left in coming to Missouri to look after the farm. I made several trips there for that purpose, but with no avail. I have about concluded to let the whole matter take its course, and if I never realize anything out of the farm, well and good. What was Will threatening is the question.
I'm excited about the death of Rutherford one. That is so cool.
And notice he says,
this is Watchtower gold history. You're like Smeagol finding the ring.
Yeah.
I have the precious.
Well, in this package that was found inside the Studies in the Scriptures found in this used bookstore was a handwritten letter dated October 11th, 1916. This is just a couple weeks before Charles Taze Russell dies. He says, should my brother Will ever kill me, please see to it that it be made known that my desire is that he be not prosecuted. Leave him entirely in the Lord's hands. I write this because of threats he has made. What kind of relationship do these men have? What kind
again, it seems like as a Christian, the judge took the higher road. He wasn't, got to say, he wasn't concerned about getting even, revenge, make sure he's prosecuted. He just, well, you know what? So be it. Let it go. He didn't want evil to his brother. So he's to be commended for that.
Yeah, I think that's a very good take on it. And as much as we know about Rutherford's history and some of the things that he did in the years to follow, this is a very good letter about Rutherford. Not so good about his brother. Here's the death threat letter. The original one. That's holding a bit of history right there, right? What kind of person was the judge's brother or brothers?
There could always be a bad apple. However, a lot of times the apple don't fall far from the tree either.
Yeah, and the other brother also had issues. So I did a little research, a little digging. There's the California versus William Rutherford. He was acquitted of manslaughter in May 1894, just a few months after he became a police officer. He shot a fleeing suspect in the back. Newspaper articles.
Okay, so this is real here.
That's real. Officer Rutherford has been indicted for perjury. So yeah, it's amazing. This information's amazing.
Wow, Jeff, this is awesome. It really is. This is awesome.
There's also the Sacramento grand jury story that basically says the shooting while on duty of a young lad, Elmer Smith, ran away, and refusing to halt, the officer fired a shot, as he says, merely to frighten the fugitive and cause him to stop. The bullet, however, struck and killed Smith. The officer was exonerated by the coroner's jury, and nothing was ever done about the matter until now. They didn't let it go, by the way. Again, says the grand jury of Sacramento has indicted policeman Rutherford for murder. Rutherford shot and killed an escaping boy whom he had endeavored to arrest about a year ago. In the February 21st, 1896 article, it says he was too zealous. Officer Rutherford has been indicted for perjury by the Sacramento grand jury, and he got caught more than once. Rutherford was also a jailer, a night jailer. William McCullough died suddenly at the jail yesterday morning. Night jailer Rutherford gave him several doses of bromide during the night, and he quieted down to some extent before morning. At 4 o'clock, he was pacing back and forth in the corridor of the jail when he suddenly collapsed and fell to the floor in a faint. Dr. Long was immediately summoned, but when he arrived, the man was dead. California versus William Rutherford II was an 1895 California criminal prosecution in which William Rutherford was acquitted of the 1985 battery on a Union Civil War veteran. Due to conflicting testimony of multiple witnesses for both the prosecution and defense, it was thrown out.
So he got in quite a bit of trouble.
Yeah, he was basically an incompetent as an officer.
Both sworn in as an officer and both as a citizen, civilian, or whatever word you want to use. So he was not someone to be trusted or relied upon for anything, I don't think.
At the end of that, it says Rutherford himself passed out drunk in public. The veteran testified about a week prior to this incident that Rutherford had spent several hours sleeping in the horse stable during his night shift. So in 1899, you have another case, California versus William Rutherford. And so Rutherford was arrested and charged with carrying a concealed weapon and threatening the life of his brother-in-law. So here is another case where he's making death threats
to family members.
Yeah, and his brother-in-law was some kind of special police officer, and they got into some kind of fight, some kind of heated argument over slot machines. And he was arrested twice for that one and charged with battery. But looks like his brother-in-law dropped the charge, but he was still guilty to the concealed weapon. And the last story I found on him is the Oakland Tribune, October 5th, 1916. And I know there's more out there, but this shows the kind of character that the guy was. It says a truck belonging to A.G. Porter and driven by J. Kennedy turned over on Sunnyside Avenue, Piedmont, injuring Mr. Merritt, who was riding in the truck. Merritt was taken to the receiving hospital by First Assistant Chief Woolley and Officer Rutherford, where it was stated that he was suffering from the concussion of the brain, a sprained wrist, and a lacerated thumb. So here, Will Rutherford was the hero.
Yeah, I didn't know all this about his brother. I knew there was a death threat and all that, but I didn't know the background of him and all that.
Well, so who knew about the death threat also? I mean, this is all new information that no one had before. But, we have many more interesting things coming. Like and subscribe. Thank you again, Paul. This has been a very fascinating discussion. Thank you all for watching. Like and subscribe. Leave some comments. Let us know what you'd like to see in the future. Get a whole story, not just from the Watchtower's perspective, but from all the various splinter groups. What were they saying? So until next time, keep reading.